Hi, this is my review of the Greatsword role-playing game Core Book. This is a high fantasy role-playing game, the highest that you can get in high fantasy. This game is focused on over-the-top, epic battles. The combat system has some of the best strategic and tactical elements that I have seen in a high fantasy role-playing game. Now let's talk about the quality of the PDF. The book is well organized and written. It's well explained as well. However, I do have some criticisms when it comes to the spacing in some of the paragraphs, sometimes due to the images and the illustrations, and I will talk about the illustrations later on. They are amazing, but just the spacing sometimes feels slightly off in just two or three instances. And I did find a few errors or typos. However, they did not present an important obstacle in understanding the content of the book. And I also found something quite unique when it comes to the arrangement of the paragraphs. The last line of each paragraph is aligned at the center, and at first I thought maybe this would be somewhat awkward or annoying as you read on with the book, but no, it actually works pretty well. It fits great with the overall graphic design of the document. So this document is actually pretty easy to read. There are no plans to bookmark the document at the moment. However, the table of contents and the index are hyperlinked. So it's going to be quite easy for you to navigate your way through the entire PDF despite the lack of bookmarks. Now let's talk about the graphic design and the illustrations. This is probably the strongest point when it comes to communicating the epicness, the legendary flavor of Greatsword. The illustrations are simply amazing, so wonderful. They remind me a bit of the artwork that you would find in Anima Beyond Fantasy, or some of the best looking art that you could find in Magic the Gathering cards. The illustrations perfectly express this world of openness, of high magic. There are so many illustrations where you can see this clear sky and floating pieces of continent, and the characters, it seems like power is constantly overflowing, just pouring out of them. It's constantly just jumping out of their eyes, like flowing as some sort of mist. It's pretty amazing. The design of the weapons, the gear, the armor, the architecture, it feels like a very interesting combination of Western and Asian aesthetics. It sometimes it reminded me a bit of Final Fantasy just at moments, but on the Yoshitaka Amano old school type of design. So the art is just breathtaking. It's simply amazing. And this is even more remarkable considering that the design, editing, exterior and interior illustrations, graphic design and writing of the entire document was all taken care of by a single person, that is the author Daniel George Mitchell. So truly amazing, great work. Now let's talk about the contents. The book starts with an introduction. This is a great book to learn how to play role-playing games. However, it leans more towards battle-focused RPGs. This doesn't mean that there is no room for some political intrigues or some interaction with the non-player characters in the game world. It just means that conflict is usually the way to solve things in Greatsword. This is a game where you will have a lot of fun overcoming the challenges and making intelligent use of different game mechanics. I particularly like the organization of this document. It starts by telling you about the game world first, and that way when you get to character creation you already have a concept of what type of character you want to create, either as a player or as a game master. However, there are some things that I think would have been better if they were arranged differently. For example, in the introduction they start to teach you some basic concepts of the game. And later on, when you start to learn about the battle system, I think it would have been great if those concepts would have been included, or at the very least repeated in the battle system section, because otherwise you will have to go back to the beginning of the core book and go through those concepts, which aren't many. But I think it would still be more comfortable for you to have everything in the battle section. And considering that, for example, in the character creation process, there is a bit of repetition, I think that would have been a better way to organize things. This game is played using miniatures, dice, specifically 20-sided dice. Now, I think this game could be played as a theater of the mind type of experience. However, you will be wasting a lot of the fun and excitement if you didn't use miniatures while playing this. This can be played with a square grid or as a miniatures war game without a grid, completely handling things by inches using your measuring tape. So at the start of the document, they do a great job at giving you some basic concepts, but I still stand by that some of the rules presented here would fit better in the combat section of the book. Now let's talk about the world of Eos, where the game of Greatsword takes place in. Most of the action is carried out in the continent of Akerush. This is a savage and exotic land. There are many races. This is a game of lots of conflicts. And it makes sense because most of the things will be resolved through war or violent interactions. So there are racial tensions, there are religious wars, there is intrigue, there is anything that could serve as an excuse for some good old-fashioned combat, but handled in the most epic and legendary way possible. Magic in Akerush is quite present and tangible. Sometimes it comes from the natural psychic abilities of a character, or maybe it is caused by a connection that exists between the characters and the land. Sometimes it comes from entities known as gods. It comes from many different places, and there are many ways in which you can play around with your character background to explain the source of his or her powers. Now let's talk about the different inhabitants of the world of Eos. First we have the human kingdoms. Despite being a high fantasy role-playing game, Greatsword also has some strong science fantasy elements. Humans, their scientific development was so much that they had great control over their world and perhaps many others. However, there seems to have been a cataclysm. They fell into decadence and their civilizations were dying. So they started to dig deep into their own planet. It is unclear if this is planet Earth or some other planet that they conquered, but they dig deep in the search of answers, of perhaps greater power or salvation, and they uncovered these immortal beings. These immortals, as they would be known later on in the story, guided humanity. They showed them a new path. They had great power, and they apparently could not die. So they proposed a way in which humanity could be saved by taking all of the species towards a new world, the world of Eos. Humanity complied, however, these guides had plans of becoming tyrants. Once they got humanity to move to this new world of Eos, they stripped humanity from their past, their legacy. They did allow them to keep their science and technology, but everything about the origins of mankind was lost, was erased. The immortals accomplished this by using their great powers. Their psychic and magical capabilities were simply unmatched. So now humanity was completely under the control of the immortals. The human kingdoms have a strong inquisitorial flavor to them. There is this religion where you have to worship the immortals, and anything else is considered a sort of heresy. Humans and non-humans are tortured and even burned in some of the cities of the immortals. Some human cities have rebelled against this, but there is still that tyrannical grasp over the entire human species. It is also encouraged to distrust and even attack and kill those that are non-humans. So humans are completely under a state of paranoia when it comes to the immortals. Even though they have fought against immortals, you will see the descriptions of different conflicts between the immortals and even other races. Of particular note, the fights they had against the Satyr. In some of these conflicts, some immortals even died. They go into this great state of power where they reveal their true nature, and it is at this point where they are at their most vulnerable despite being also at their most powerful. That is, they are capable of great destruction, but that is the best chance you have to kill an immortal. Some other immortals were incapacitated. They fell into sort of like a coma, So you can see how there is a lot of struggle when it comes to humans trying to survive in the continent of Akeraz. Some humans went so far as to challenge the immortals openly. A couple of human lovers, a man and a woman, decided to challenge the immortals. However, they managed to do this by channeling the power of some sort of divine being, or perhaps some sort of alien power that is the natural enemy of the immortals. Immortals have even warned humanity that this strange entity managed to almost wipe out the entirety of the immortals, and that this being was also responsible for the decadence of humanity. However, a lot of humans do not trust immortals, so it is still a mystery if this strange enemy of the immortals is a friend or ally of humanity. Strangely enough, there are even some immortals that actually want to help humanity, and they clash with other immortals. And a couple of twin immortals have actually attained a certain degree of stability within the human kingdoms. So it is a love and hate relationship. Sometimes humans fight against the immortals, sometimes they are led by them. Sometimes there is conflict with other non-humans, but since this couple of immortals have taken control, now there is even trade and agreements with other non-human species. So the human kingdoms are quite chaotic. There is a lot of opportunity to fight in favor or against the immortals, or to have unrelated adventures and campaigns as well. With their advanced technology and their constantly developing science, humans have a very strong science fantasy flavor to them, perhaps only rivaled by the ogres. Many of the kingdoms, clans, and empires of the world of Eos, not only humans, have a duality to them. Some of them have a more civilized side, and they have another more savage side. And a great example of this are the Gnolls. Since the beginning of their history, Gnolls have been divided based on their religion. At first, they had a sort of summoned being that served as the god for a group of Gnolls, but later on, the rest of the Gnoll species recognized that this being was somewhat suspicious in its agenda towards the Gnolls. So there was a great battle where this being was eliminated. However, a group of Gnoll cultists prophesied that a new Gnoll god by the name of Ruxul would come and guide the Gnolls towards glory. So you have a group of Gnolls that are not in harmony with this concept. These are the Gnoll clans. They are nomads, they are hunters. They are more barbaric. While the more civilized Gnolls, they went in search of this mysterious entity that would come from beyond Eos. These Gnolls were aided by ogres. As they attempted to reach this light that fell from the sky, they wanted to reach the place where this strange light landed, and they found Ruxul, the new god for the Gnolls, or at least for half of them, because the clans do not trust this new being, and they have their own loyalties towards their clansmen. So you have information on different Gnoll clans, such as the Dragon Clansmen, the Serpent Clan, the Moon Clan, but it is indisputable that this new god, known as Ruxul, has a strong grip not only over the Gnolls, but also in other places of Akeraz. Many non-Gnolls, that is, creatures from other species and races, have flocked towards Ruxul because he gives great power to them. And if you become a follower of Ruxul, if you become blessed by him, your body is actually modified. You gain this blue color of sorts. You start to look a bit more alien. So the Gnolls are divided. Some of them want to carry out the will of Ruxul upon the entirety of Eos, but some others are just interested in their own clansmen and on surviving and finding prosperity. Then we have the Arachnid. It is believed that the Arachnids were once servants to a very ancient race. But now the Arachnids are carving their own ways. They are making new hives through the entirety of Eos. There is a labyrinth of Arachnid complexes beneath the surface of Akeraz. Arachnids have a hive mentality of sorts. They think as a collective. They are mostly in harmony with one another, but there have been important wars between the different hives of the arachnids. The queens are the ones who rule over the entirety of the species. Most of the arachnids have a drone-like mentality, but there are others, the praetorians, who have free will. These are the ones that mate with the huge, perhaps even gigantic queens to produce new arachnids. So the queens are constantly vying for power. There have been some important wars that have risked the entire extinction of particular hives, and some arachnids, in their quest for power, have uncovered ancient crypts and tombs where the secrets of necromancy have been unveiled. So the arachnids have some of the most powerful necromancers in the entire world of Eos. Then we have the ogre civilization. Ogres are somewhat similar to humans in that they are not native to Eos. They come from a dying world. But the difference when compared to humans is that the ogres that currently exist in Eos are descendants of a group of exiles. Not all of the ogres in their dying world wanted to make the journey towards Eos. Only a few of them taking just the most necessary things. So even though the ogres are even more advanced when compared to humans in terms of science, because they arrived with very little made technology, some of their secrets were lost. They could manage to develop several things, reveal some things of their former glory, but many of them have to rely on their natural strength. However, despite this, most of the technological achievements of the different species and races can be traced back to an ogre origin, because the ogres, as newcomers to the world of Eos, they had to be quite diplomatic about their interactions with other inhabitants, so they shared many of their technological secrets. Ogres are very strong but also very intelligent. Most of them do not follow gods or deities, but a significant portion of them are followers of Ruxul, because when the gnolls were traveling in search of Ruxul, some ogres cooperated with them, and so they received a portion of Ruxul's power. Then we have the Nagas. The Nagas look a bit more sinister when compared to the other species. They rely heavily on slaves. These slaves are not Nagas, so the other inhabitants of Eos are fearful of Nagas when they arrive in their ships. There is a high possibility that they will try to capture you and take you as a slave. Nagas have a strict hierarchy based on castes. The highest hierarchy of seers are worshipped as gods. The only other powers above them are the star gods, and they have been lost in time. The Nagas are not exactly sure what happened to their gods, but they want to bring them into this world of Eos. They are constantly making sacrifices, literally taking living beings and empowering the gateway between the world of the star gods and Eos through their blood and flesh sacrifices. In these questionable rites, the Naga have actually managed to get their hands on one of the most powerful beings on Eos and managed to transform that individual into a living incarnation of the star gods. Then we have the orc hordes. The orcs in this setting are quite different. This is probably the most powerful orc empire that I have seen in a fantasy role-playing game. The orcs are quite civilized but also quite savage, standing their ground against natural dangers but at the same time being a part of nature. Orcs are strong. Honor is paramount, and even though they are not chained to particular religions, like in the case of the gnolls or humans, there is a very powerful spiritual element to them. Their current emperor could be considered a demigod after a strange vision that granted this orc superpowers when compared to the rest of his race. The orc clans are quite warlike. It's not uncommon for them to fight against each other, but they are quite formidable when they actually join against other enemy groups. They have clashed with almost every other intelligent race on the surface of Akarash and against any other type of beast. And if it weren't for the difficulty that the Orc Emperor sometimes has trying to control or coordinate the other Orc clans, they would have completely dominated the entirety of the continent of Akarash, surely. Then we have the Satyr. When compared to the other species, the satyr feel more tribal. They are divided in groups, they do not work together. Most of the time, they have councils where they talk about different issues of importance, but for the most part, each tribe is quite separate from each other. One of their tribes actually looks human after their brief interaction with one of the immortals. Satyrs are defenders of the natural world. They worship beings of great power known as the Alcanvi. They are huge centaurian-like creatures that wield powerful magic, but that also possess immense physical strength. The Alcanvi and the satyr did not get along at first, but when the satyr recognized the great magical powers of the Alcanvi, they wanted to be taught how to use such strange and miraculous powers. And after the Alcanvi taught the satyr a special ritual that could bind a female satyr with an elemental heart, they managed to create a goddess, the mother of the forest. The satyr have had many conflicts. Some tribes have wanted to separate themselves from the rest of the satyrs. There have been some internal battles that were quite bloody, and there was also outside interference by the hand of Ruxul, but nonetheless the satyrs still tried to survive and thrive at the side of their Alcanvi icons. And then we have the Valkyrie. The Valkyrie, just like the satyr, are somewhat fragmented. They are divided in small groups. They once lived together in a huge floating continent. In the world of Eos, there are many floating mountains, pieces of land, continental masses, and the Valkyries were masters of this type of terrain. However, their civilization did not last for long, and after a cataclysm, many of the Valkyrie clans went their own way. In general terms, all Valkyries are quite fearsome, quite aggressive. Perhaps only the orcs match their violence in battle. The different clans have different objectives and ideas on what the future of the Valkyrie species as a whole should be. Some of them are quite violent towards the rest of the world of Eos. However, some members of the Valkyrie do believe that there is some future in collaborating with the other inhabitants of the world of Eos. Many feuds and conflicts have shaped and decided the future of the Valkyrie. It is said that the Valkyrie once had great freedom to move through the air, that they had great wings. However, something happened and only small traces of these wings remain. The Valkyrie can fly in a limited way, but not with as much freedom as before. So it is common for the Valkyrie to have some conflicts with the aerial beasts of Eos, but also they have managed to tame some of these beasts and monsters. Now, I have only given you a brief overview of each of the races. There are many more details concerning how their kingdoms and empires and clans and tribes changed throughout the years, the different conflicts between the different groups. You could be thinking that it would be difficult to make a party of adventurers with members from different races and groups. However, in the Game Master section of this book, they show you that it's quite easy to do so, because there are mercenary groups, there are just plain old adventuring groups, there could be some diplomatic groups, military groups, etc. You could have campaigns based around the troubles of a particular species, or perhaps you have a mixed group that doesn't care too much about the racial conflicts or tensions and they just want to be effective as soldiers of fortune, or just exploring the mysteries of the world of Eos and specifically the continent of Akarash. It's very interesting to see how some conflicts that happen in a particular area of Akarash connects with other conflicts related to other factions, other races and groups, etc. To create a character, you need to follow 5 simple steps. First, you determine your stats, then you choose your race and your class. Then you spend experience points to further flesh out your character, and you choose some personal details. When it comes to stats, you have accuracy, agility, intelligence, melee, perception, stealth, strength, and willpower. This is a game focused completely on combat for the most part. You do have opportunities to carry out different checks, but if you wanted like a slow political drama, this is probably not the game for you. You could handle it like that, but you will be wasting many of the exciting mechanics that have been specifically tailored for combat encounters. So these statistics represent capacities of your character to solve different maneuvers and attacks in battle. Checks are quite easy. You have a difficulty number that you need to overcome. The standard difficulty of a challenge is 20. So to make a check, you roll a 20-sided die. You add the particular statistic related to that check. Maybe you are making an attack, it's a melee attack, you add your melee stat. Or maybe it's something related to a ranged attack, you use accuracy. And you try to overcome that difficulty number. In the case of 20, you have to roll 21 or above that. But there are many things that modify these different checks. So you have to keep that in mind as you build your character. Your health is related to your strength, and you also have stamina points. Stamina is essential in combat. You can only do certain attacks as much as you have stamina points. That is, each maneuver or attack that you take in combat usually requires you spending stamina points. And if you spend all of your points during your turn, you may not have points left to carry out reactions when you are attacked. So it's all about being smart and just casting the appropriate spells or carrying out the different attacks, activating talents and such, while keeping in mind that you may need some stamina points for reactions later on. Now, before we get into race and class and the ways that you can customize your character, let me talk about personal details. You just need to generate a name, a backstory, and a description of your character, how he looks physically. You even have some random tables to give some names to your character. You could randomly determine your name or just pick the names that you want. So for example, for humans you have names such as Brovar or Dranos, or perhaps Alesis or Erani. On the side of Arachnid, you have names such as Vecnath or Ragni. On the null side of things, you have names such as Ect or Sethrani. On the ogre side, you have names such as Baku or Xaru. On the Naga side, you have names such as Occult or Sekhan. On the satyr side, you have names such as Druda and Odilia. And on the orc side, you have names such as Jargal or Zenga. And in Valkyrie, we have names such as Dasune or Anami. You even have a table to determine motivations and flaws. This will help you orientate yourself as to what your character is searching for, and it will also allow your game master to bring out some objectives and quests related to your character's motivations and flaws. So maybe your character is looking for revenge, or power, or glory. Or maybe your flaws are based on hate, or vanity, or fear. Now let's talk about the races that you can choose and the ways in which you can choose your class. There is no multi-classing in this game. However, you can purchase talents from other classes, but they are more expensive. You purchase them spending experience points. And of course, as you adventure in the world of Eos and you gain more experience points, you can also level up your primary stats and your vital stats. Let's talk about how the races are specialized in certain things. Well, humans are not really specialists because they are good at almost everything, but not superb or exceptional. You can further customize them to be perhaps strong warriors or stealthy scouts or skilled magicians, but for the most part they are good as generalists. And being masters of industry, they start with more gold, so they can actually start the game better equipped. Then when it comes to the Arachnid, they have some spidery-like traits. They are very good at climbing up the walls and ceilings. They have dark vision, and they also have a certain communication or communion with insects. They are pretty good at fighting up close and personal and casting spells. When it comes to Gnolls, they are the best probably at being skirmishers or stealthy scouts. They are quite agile and accurate in their shots. However, they aren't too big so don't expect them to be too effective as frontliners. However, if you want to build a character around the concept of being quite skilled at dodging, this could be a good character race for you. And they are also quite fast. They can cover ground significantly faster than others. When it comes to the ogres, and I really like the ogres, they are really smart and strong. They can work as melee combatants, but if you wanted to create a character that focuses on magical abilities, you could also do that. The ogres are the largest type of characters that you can create. They can basically wield a two-handed weapon with a single arm, but because of that, as you would expect, they are not very good at maneuvers or operations that require stealth and subtlety. When it comes to the Naga, they are highly skilled at both range and close quarters combat, but they are not the best characters when it comes to using intelligence and willpower. They are not very perceptive either, but because of their additional arms and their amphibious qualities, they are pretty efficient in all sorts of combat situations. They could attack 4 times per turn, for example. Now, when it comes to the Satyr, they are quite agile and accurate, so they are also great to serve as skirmishers if you wanted to, or scouts or rangers. And they are also quite perceptive. And they are at home in the natural environment. So you wanted a character to navigate the wilderness with great efficiency, this is the character race for you. Now the orcs, they are pretty strong and ferocious. So much so that they cannot be stunned. They are the best at melee combat. They are just decent at other things, but you wanted a character that specializes in being a close quarters combat machine. This is the type of character for you. Now the Valkyrie aren't very sturdy, but they are quite agile and perceptive. And because of the way they can fly in a limited way across the battlefield, ignoring terrain, they are great for hit and run attacks. So this is another good candidate to target specific weak areas in the enemy formation. Now classes in this game are very simple to understand. You have some talents and abilities that make each class different from the others, but you do not have like a huge list of spells. The depth and complexity of Greatsword rather comes from the strategies and tactics that you can take in combat, rather than going through a huge list of things that you can do with a single character class. Let's start talking about the Artificer. If you wanted a sort of like weird science sorceress type of character, this is the character class for you. You could fight alongside some of your constructs. You are great at making any sorts of tests requiring your artifice skill. You're a master craftsman. So you can have some really unusual weapons while casting some spells such as arcane bolts. You could craft all sorts of allies, huge clockwork golems, flying allies. You can toss lightning strikes around, forked lightning, create energy spheres. You can be a grenadier. You can also sense things in a psychic way and even teleport around. You can create thunderstorms. This character class feels a lot as if you wanted to combine a steampunk sort of sorcerer with a Jedi Knight. So this is a very cool class. And then we have the Assassin. So the Assassin is the best character class to sneak around the battlefield, with talents such as Dark Cloud, Assassin Strike, Acrobatics, Fast Hands, Face Changer. You can move across the battlefield, killing your opponents and even stealing things from them, and using those things against your enemy in that same combat encounter. You are also pretty handy in survivalist type of situations with abilities such as Scavenger. Then you have the Berserker. With your Blood Rage ability, you feel a lot like a vampire. You kill and kill enemies and you regain health while killing them. The Berserker is perfect to take on hordes of enemies, with talents such as Blade Storm, Flagellation, where you actually hurt yourself to deal stronger blows. You also have some things such as Frenzy, Free from Pain, Slayer, Tattoos of Rage, Warcry. This is a very offensive character class, and you will see how it makes a great contrast with the next character class, which is the Knight. The Knight focuses on heavy armor training. This is the sturdiest, most unmovable of the character classes, The knight focuses on using shields, perhaps doing cavalry charges. If you wanted a knight that is a mounted combatant type of character, this is the character class for you. You also have some things such as Indomitable, Imperishable, Killing Blow, Smash Away, Strong Back. So this character is quite unmovable and sturdy. It's the opposite of the Berserker, who is more focused on eliminating foes as quickly as possible while still having the ability to take a hit. The Knight is there to protect the party members and to dishearten the opponent, as the opponent rains blow after blow on the Knight and he still won't go down. Then we have the Marksman. The Marksman is a great character if you wanted to create a sort of like ranger or scout type of character as well. Your eagle eyes allow you to be perfect when performing search actions. You are great at awareness and perceiving things. And of course you are really good at shooting. You have things such as additional shot, expert dodge, extreme throw, headshot. So this is a perfect character to carry out ranged attacks. Keep yourself away from the enemy and eliminate that enemy from a distance. But you also have some things such as Beastmaster, so you wanted a character to have around different pets. This is a really good character class for that as well. And then we have the Monk, a supernaturally gifted martial artist that is even capable of parrying armed attacks using his bare hands. This monk has different powers to damage and even heal those around him, with attacks such as Dragon's Storm, Dragon's Wave, Dragon Kick, abilities such as Divine Power, Divine Shield, Healing Spirits, and Healing Hands. The monk is quite capable of healing or killing as it is needed in the combat encounter. Then we have the Necromancer. Necromancy is quite rare but quite powerful in the world of Eos. If you wanted a small force of undead following you around, this is the character class for you. You can also do some other things. You can cast battle curses. You can create bone cages around your opponents. You can attack them with things such as Death's Hand or Doom. You can create a doppelganger of you, a ghostly doppelganger. You can drain the life force from your opponents, their spirits. And of course you can create all sorts of undead minions to serve you in battle. You also have the Shaman. The Shaman represents a living link between the races and the world of Eos, and specifically the continent of Akarash. You start out with a specific elemental resistance, and you can transform into beasts. You could even change into a dragon if you wanted to. So you have things such as beast form, dragon form. You can do attacks such as Crushing Stone, Ice Storm, Fireball. You could become a master of specific elements and control the weather. So these are the classes that you can choose for your character. But if you wanted to further customize them, remember that you can take talents from other classes that are not your main class, but they are more expensive in experience points. So make sure you make some wise choices as you are building up your character. Maybe you want a Berserker that still has some spell capabilities, or maybe you want to create a Necromancer that also wields some shamanic powers. It's all up to you. Let's talk about actions in combat. You determine initiative in combat based on your agility, and then you carry out your actions. Each action costs a number of stamina points, which you spend, but they refresh or regenerate at the start of your next combat turn. So you have to think not only of what you are able to do during your turn, but also the reactions that you could carry out during someone else's turn. Every action in Greatsword is solved in a very simple way, as I was telling you. You just roll your 20-sided die, you add the relevant stat related to a talent that you are using or any sort of action you are carrying out, and you try to roll above the difficulty number, which is usually 20. And there are some other factors, like for example the armor that your opponent is wearing, that could raise or lower the difficulty of your action. Now, something that I really like, considering this is a very battle-focused RPG, is that you can carry out multiple strikes with no significant penalty. That is, maybe you have a Naga character and you want to attack with all of your arms. You can do that, you won't suffer penalties. And you could be thinking, well, what's the point of that, considering details in battle, in dual wielding or in this case attacking with 4 arms, well, you could be attacking with a weapon in each hand, or you could use, in the case of a normal character, use a shield in one hand and use your sword with the other. Or you could decide to wield a heavy two-handed weapon, because the armor also offers damage reduction. So maybe you want to deal a single crushing blow trying to overcome that damage reduction. And if you wanted to use just a single weapon and have your other arm or hand free, you could also do that, because you could specialize in grappling with your opponent, or maybe you could do some other things with your hand, activate something, carry something, etc. You have all the details on how to choose a target, check line of sight, check range, make the test, deal damage, and everything concerning injury and death. So for example, let's say that you want to attack a character with your sword. You make a roll, and maybe the armor of said character actually raises the difficulty to hit that character to 22. So now you need to roll 23 or above. If you actually manage to score a hit, the armor could also reduce the damage, so keep that in mind. You can also score critical hits, which is double damage. And in the case of, for example, taking the hit points of your enemy to 0 or below, then your opponent would be incapacitated. These are just temporary hit points. You make a roll in the injury and death table, and it could result in some very nasty consequences. Maybe you cracked your enemy's skull, reducing his intelligence, or maybe you crushed his spirit, so now his willpower is reduced. You could inflict some really nasty wounds that would present penalties later on, so it's better not to get yourself too injured. You could also cause blood loss. The character starts to lose maximum hit points as the rounds pass. Or maybe you could even immediately kill your opponent. Now the characters in Greatsword, the player characters specifically, feel larger than life. You are epic heroes. Non-player characters usually die when they are taken to 0 hit points, but when your temporary hit points are taken to 0, you are just incapacitated, and you still have a chance to get a second wind and get up. So if you like those dramatic over-the-top scenes, like for example in Game of Thrones, where the mountain actually manages to get up and inflict damage once more, even though he was skewered by his opponent, you could do that, you could have those moments. Or in the case of the Scorpion King, how the Scorpion King still gets up after being all mauled and battered and injured. This is a game for those exaggerated type of scenes. But even so, if you keep attacking your incapacitated enemy, you may end up killing your enemy right away, or inflicting more wounds that take points from his main stats. So you have details on how to handle cover, how to focus attacks and damage. You can spend more stamina points so that you can get a better bonus when doing attacks, or if you want to deal more damage. And when it comes to grappling and throwing, it's quite simple. It's another type of attack. You need a free hand to grapple an opponent, and it's an attack roll based on strength. Once you manage to score a grapple attack, you are clinching with your opponent, and the opponent will not be able to use, for example, shields, will not be able to move, and later on, or in that same moment if you want, you could try to throw or smash your opponent. So this is a perfect move. If there is some sort of abyss or pit nearby, you can try to knock down your opponent. And just to explain myself better when it comes to getting that second wind, every turn then you are incapacitated and you haven't bled out and died, you get to make a difficulty 30 strength roll to see if you can manage to get up. So you actually recover a small amount of temporary hit points and you can keep on fighting. So you have all sorts of details concerning rear attack, bonus, attacking objects and structures, walls, doors, how to carry out charging attacks, how to overwatch. So you wait for your opponent and you interrupt your opponent's action. You have all the details on how to move your character. You can only make a maximum of 3 move actions per round, so that gives you ample opportunities to play around with movement and your own talents, making attacks before, during, or after different move steps. You can also change your equipment, climb, move through difficult ground, details on what happens when you are down or knocked down, how to crawl, how to pick up objects, how to trample smaller opponents. If you're an ogre, you're going to love trampling your opponents if they are smaller. How minions such as undead creatures or constructs carry out their attacks during their controller's turn. How to heal your allies using, for example, first aid. Now this game, as I was saying, is completely focused on combat. You do have some details on, for example, how to use your knowledge, persuasion, interrogation, bribery, picking locks. But those types of checks are quite streamlined. They are the same thing. A simple check in which you roll a 20-sided die and you add the related attribute. So this is a very streamlined and fast way to keep the action going. This is not a game of huge skill lists. This is a game focused on combat talents, and the rest is handled in a streamlined way. You could also parry your enemy's attacks. However, if you are fighting an opponent several sizes larger than your character, 3 sizes or more, it would be a lot better to dodge his attacks. Parry won't be effective. So this actually makes it more feasible that an agile type of character, or more on the finesse side, could be better trying to take on or tank an opponent that is much larger, perhaps a giant or a dragon. You could have your nimble gnoll to take care of that enemy, while characters such as humans or orcs take on other opponents. It's also important to mention that many of the talents have ways in which you can empower them. You can spend more stamina points so you can have a better effect. So spells could deal more damage, healing abilities could heal more hit points, and so forth. You have a chapter detailing how to purchase equipment, all the details concerning weight, encumbrance, money and wealth. You have a list of the different types of weapons and armor that you can get. So you have, for example, primitive armor or plated leather. You have half plate or full plate armor. You also have weapons such as, for example, light crossbow with different types of ammunition, all sorts of arrows and bolts, throwing darts, javelins. You have repeating crossbows, great crossbows. Most of the weapons here are fantasy weapons. You won't find, for example, handguns and cannons and such, unless we are talking about constructs, and we'll talk about that in a bit. When it comes to melee weapons, you have all sorts of maces, great axes, giant axes. Some of the most cumbersome and heavy weapons can only be wielded, for example, by ogres effectively. You also have iron claws, great swords, halberds, pikes. You also have some miscellaneous things such as clothing, food and drink, different items such as chests, fishing gear, shovels. You have a list of prices concerning services, potions such as incendiary potion, light potion, healing potions, all sorts of alchemical reagents and substances. You have a list of clockwork sentinels. So, for example, if you're playing as an artificer type of character, this is a great section for you to choose your different clockwork pets and sentries, guardians, brutes. You even have a list on sentinel upgrades. You could equip your constructs with flame cannons and propelling hooks, spike guns. You also have information on tools and kits such as the alchemist's kit, crafting kits, lockpicking kits, etc. If you are playing as an assassin type of character, you also have a nice selection of traps, so you can pick and choose depending on the situation. You have things such as spike pits, barbed nets. You also have ways to upgrade or improve your weapons and armor. So for example, in melee weapons you can add or rather use folded steel, sharpened edge. In ranged weapons you have things such as improved balance. In armor and shields you have hardened plates, ridges or spikes. You could even have elemental weapons, elemental armor and shields as well. You have a list of purchasable animals if you want to have a mount or an animal companion. You have things such as draghorn, bloodhorns. You also have purchasable vehicles such as sky chariots, galleys, sky barges. Details on how to move mounts, mounting and dismounting, crewing a vehicle, even purchasing animal armor. You have profiles for different sorts of vehicles. The Great Sword book contains an excellent section of how to run games. That is a game master section. You have details on how to create a campaign, handling the campaign as a sandbox, or a bit more on the story arc or railroad side of things. You have details on how to start the campaign, establish the goal of the party, the party types. This is going to be very handy if you want a party of, for example, ogres, humans, arachnids, satyrs. You need a reason as to why those types of adventurers are traveling together. They could be a mercenary company, they could be soldiers for a specific type of unit. Maybe there is some sort of secret alliance between different races and groups. You also have tips on how to create quests and some beginning game master tips on how to handle distractions and table talk when running the game, how to prepare, how to take notes, the locations and scope of your campaign, how to make sense of objectives and quests and encounters in a campaign, how to reward the players, perhaps by giving them powerful items or experience points, how to create and run non-player characters, everything related to their traits and talents, their goals. You even have a random table to determine the non-player characters' roles. You have tips on how to handle anything related to character progression. You have like a detailed method or a quest method, so you can basically reward experience points in any way that you want, individually or as a group, and after achieving certain objectives within the quest or missions. You have details on rare and unique artifacts, such as the Arcane Fists of Urs, or the Ancient Energy Siphon, the Obsidian Gauntlet, or the Soul Mirror. You also have tables to generate random loot, tables concerning common items or military items. You also have a bestiary with all sorts of animals, lesser beasts, bloodhorns, darkhorns, some beasts that you have to eliminate, some others that could actually serve you as mounts or as pets. You also have other monsters such as goblins, mountain giants, trolls. You also have some pre-generated examples of the standard player character races such as arachnids, gnolls. You have dragons, of course, all sorts of dragons like Dragon Wormling or the Dragon Prime, which is quite terrifying. You also have details on humans, ogres, nagas, satyrs, orcs, undead as well, valkyries. The stats and profiles are quite easy to read and understand. They're quite simple. You can see how they use different weapons and attacks and talents to either hinder or assist the player characters. So it's going to be quite easy for you to take any of these profiles and tweak and play around with them and create your own non-player characters to serve as obstacles or allies during a campaign. And at the end of the book you have an adventure, the Sky Temple. This is an introductory quest for newly created characters. This is basically about the characters uncovering the secrets of the Sky Temple. Now, I'm not going to give you spoilers because I know there are many players watching this review, but suffice to say, I think this adventure serves as a great example on what will make or break a Great Sword game, which is the pacing of the adventure. Because this is a game heavily based on combat, the Sky Temple shows you how you have interactions with the non-player characters. Perhaps they're just giving you a mission. Perhaps you are trying to negotiate something, to ask more information about the site you are going towards. And then it's all about action. High-paced, insane combat action. As you are trying to make sense of the situation, spending the right amount of stamina points using your talents, and keeping in mind that those few stamina points that you decided to save for reactions could actually save your life. You're going to need a lot of teamwork. Great Sword is a game that requires the player characters to work together. Even though you are larger than life heroes, you do not underestimate your opponents just because of that. As I said in the combat section, there is a possibility of your character dying even if you have that small chance of getting up and keep on fighting. This is a game that encourages great teamwork as well as the smart use of stamina points. At the end of the book, you have a list of traits. This has to do with any sort of weapons that you can use. Some weapons have special properties in the way that you use them to attack or protect yourself, but also you may gain some conditions when the enemies are using some sort of talents or maneuvers against you, or when you are using your own talents and special powers against your enemies. So all of these traits are things such as amphibious, aquatic, blast, blind, flight, heavy, loyal, parry, smash, all sorts of things related to when you are throwing your enemy around, when somebody has cast some sort of spell of you and maybe you ended up being stunned, or maybe you have an ability or trait that allows you in different situations. It's all about that. And you even have a quick reference giving you the structure of a combat round and the things that you can do during a combat round. I would consider this small quick reference sheet a must-have at all times when you are playing a game, because even though this is at its core a simple system, there are many actions, reactions, and attacks that you need to consider, that you need to think about, especially because you are thinking on how to spend those stamina points wisely. So what do I think of the Greatsword RPG? If you are looking for a high fantasy role-playing game focused on exciting combats that require smart choices to be done concerning how you are going to spend your stamina points and understanding the battlefield, the types of effects that can be inflicted upon you or the ones that you're going to be inflicting on your opponent, this is the role-playing game for you. I love the high fantasy flavor of it all and how it breaks many standard fantasy molds. You have the ogres and the orcs that are quite different from your standard ogres and orcs in other fantasy role-playing games. The gnolls and the satyrs also present significant differences when compared to other RPGs, but I definitely have like a soft spot for the orcs and ogres, that they break all of the molds presented when it comes to their society, the way that they act and their natural traits. For example, the ogres being very strong but also of a scientific thought process of sorts. The art is beautiful and the world has so many conflicts and problems, so it's a perfect situation to solve all sorts of matters concerning the fates of different races and different regions and zones. I think it's going to be key, greatly important, for you to handle a good pace in your adventures. So it's great that they included a sample adventure, because now you have a sort of guideline to follow. It's all about keeping that balance of interacting with the world, talking with the non-player characters, developing the personal story of your character, and then it's all about combat. I think it's great that all of the different character classes have very simple to understand talents, that you do not have like a huge list of spells, which would be quite cumbersome for a game like this that focuses on fast-paced battles. The complexity and depth rather comes from the strategies and tactics that you can employ. So you play around with your talents, with the way that you build your character, and you try to come up with the best solution for a particular battle. This is not to say that you cannot have some moments focused on exploration and diplomacy and such, but everything in the game seems to be built around exciting combat. You must keep that in mind. This is a role-playing game for people who want more action, for people who want to move from one exciting event to the other. This is about solving a problem or conflict and then taking a look at the aftermath, trying to find information that points you to your next direction, and then cutting and crushing your way to your goals and objectives. I also like it that all of the character classes, even those that feel a bit more specialized like the assassin, are still well suited for all sorts of combat situations. And of course, as I was saying, for example, that the berserker is more suited to handle hordes of enemies, while for example the knight could take on a very large, almost impossible to defeat foe and still end up with barely a scratch, while perhaps the assassin is flanking and the artificer is moving his golem around to specific objectives. There are many ways in which you can carry out or build some interesting strategies and tactics. You never feel like a class is going to be useless when push comes to shove. You always feel that you have a chance to take several opponents on your own, while taking into account that each character class is more strong or suited in different situations concerning magic, getting the opponent busy, assassinating a specific character in the enemy force, or taking hold of a particular zone or area. It's all about battlefield objectives, in my opinion, when it comes to the way the character classes work together in a certain chaotic harmony. So I would say that this RPG is not for those that want to play as more normal type of characters. If you want to play as characters that could end up dying quite easily, this RPG is probably not for you. But for the rest of you that want to feel as a larger than life, epic, awesome, legend in the making sort of character that starts out quite powerful and becomes frighteningly devastating later on, this is the RPG for you. Just by taking a look at the cover, you can see how all of the characters are just overflowing with eldritch might. They are so incredibly powerful. Their greatness is overflowing in a very visible way. So I highly recommend that you get Greatsword, the role-playing game, for the highest of high fantasy combat and adventuring. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know, and see you later.